My name is Stacy. I'm sitting in my new office, looking out at the harbor, and the memories come flooding back. It all started with that fateful day in my former boss's office. I was standing in Mr. Thompson's office, trying to process his words. Pack your things. Your position has been eliminated. The termination hit me like a physical shock, though I'd been expecting it for days. It was just a week after Ms. Harper's funeral, and here I was being fired. The timing was no coincidence. I kept my expression neutral, even though I was seething inside. I understand, I said calmly. He slid a folder across the desk. We need all client information transferred immediately, especially any contacts you've been handling directly. I nodded and took the folder without opening it. Of course, I replied. Then he leaned forward, his urgency barely concealed. We also need details about the West Coast accounts. Ms. Harper mentioned them before her passing. That's when I knew they had no idea that Ms. Harper had officially transferred the entire $1,200,000 portfolio to me 3 days before her heart attack. And they had no clue that I'd already quietly resigned via certified mail that morning. I'll gather everything, I promised with a smile. Mr. Thompson seemed disappointed by my calm reaction. He'd expected me to break down, but instead, he got my professionalism, which clearly unsettled him. You have until the end of the day, he said, waving me away. As I walked out of his office, I could feel the curious stares of my colleagues. Some looked away guiltily, knowing my fate, while others watched with barely concealed satisfaction. One less competitor on the corporate ladder. At my desk, I started packing my personal items into a small cardboard box that HR had provided. How thoughtful of them. Nell from accounting came over, whispering, "Is it true they're letting you go?" Apparently, my position has been eliminated, I replied, carefully wrapping a small crystal paperweight that Ms. Harper had given me for my 3-year anniversary at the company. That's ridiculous. You brought in that huge Coastal Solutions account just last month, she said. I shrugged. Business decisions rarely make sense from the outside. What I didn't say was that this was exactly what Ms. Harper had predicted and what we had planned for. 6 months earlier, Ms. Harper had called me into her office late one evening. The office was quiet, with only the distant hum of the cleaning crew's vacuum. "Stacy," she said as I entered. "Close the door." I did as she asked and sat across from her. She pushed aside her computer monitor and slid a glass of water towards me. "I've been watching you outperform everyone for 3 years, she said, her gaze intense. Yet they keep passing you over for promotion. I'd been at the company for 5 years. Despite bringing in more new business than anyone else, I was stuck while less qualified men were climbing the corporate ladder. The executive team has a particular vision, and apparently we don't fit it," she continued carefully. What she didn't say, but we both understood, was that the all-male leadership team maintained their positions through a web of favoritism. Ms. Harper had hit the glass ceiling so hard that she'd given up trying to break through. Then she dropped a bombshell.
I'm dying.
Cancer. 6 months, maybe less. I nearly choked on my water. When I'm gone, they'll tear apart my client relationships like vultures, she said. And then she outlined her plan. She would gradually introduce me to her most valuable clients, the West Coast portfolio worth $1,200,000 in annual contracts. Officially, these meetings would look like routine support work. "They're watching the big accounts," she explained, "but it's the smaller, scattered ones that really matter." For months, we worked together in plain sight. I met with creative entrepreneurs, boutique manufacturers, and innovative startups along the coast. Ms. Harper introduced me as her right hand. The clients trusted her judgment. Meanwhile, at the office, the whispers started. "Stacy's spending a lot of time with Ms. Harper, probably angling for a promotion," one colleague said loudly as I passed the break room. Another snorted in response. My immediate supervisor, Mr. Thompson, started asking for unusual reports and asking pointed questions about client meetings. I gave him just enough information to satisfy him without revealing our true activities. 2 weeks before she died, Ms. Harper finalized the paperwork for the legal transfer of client relationships. She even paid the transfer fees from her personal account. "They'll come for you after I'm gone," she warned. "Be ready." The day she died, I cried real tears. She'd become more than a mentor. But beneath my grief, her plan was already in motion. At her funeral, the executive team put on a show of sorrow. Mr. Thompson placed his hand on my shoulder, and his touch was unwelcome. "Such a loss," he said. "We'll need to discuss transitioning her account soon." I nodded, looking down. Whatever the company needs. That evening, I got a text from the CEO. "Meeting tomorrow. Bring the complete client list." I stayed up all night preparing 2 sets of documents. One set included every client except those in the West Coast portfolio, and the other was my resignation letter, effective immediately. At the meeting the next morning, the CEO looked at my incomplete list. "Where are the West Coast accounts?" he demanded. "I'm not familiar with those," I said, keeping my expression neutral. "She handled them personally." His face tightened. "Search her files. We need those clients." For a week, I pretended to search while secretly meeting with my new clients. Every evening, Mr. Thompson would demand updates, and every morning, I'd report finding nothing. The company grew desperate as the quarterly projections looked bleak without those accounts. The executive team had closed-door meetings, and then came my termination. As I was leaving with my box of belongings, Mr. Thompson approached me one last time. "Before you go, where are those West Coast files? This is business. The company needs those accounts," he said urgently. I looked him in the eye. "I have no idea what you're talking about." He got angry. "Those clients represent over $1 million in annual revenue. They belong to this company." I picked up my box. Actually, they belong to whoever they choose to work with. I stepped into the elevator as the doors closed on his angry face, and I allowed myself a small smile. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. After my termination, I woke up before my alarm the next morning. The silence of not having to rush to the office was strange, like an unfamiliar blanket. I made coffee and sat on my balcony, watching the city wake up. My phone buzzed with messages from my few friendly colleagues. Nell had sent 3 worried texts. He replied briefly, "Ai fine." Better than fine. The truth was, I'd been preparing for this day for months. The night before MS. Harper's funeral, I'd opened a business checking account. 2 days later, I'd filed the paperwork for my new limited liability company. 3 weeks after that, I'd secured a small office space in a converted warehouse by the waterfront, just a short walk from 5 of my new clients. Then I got a call from Mr. Lewis, the chief legal counsel of the company. There seems to be some confusion regarding certain client relationships formerly managed by MS. Harper. The company would like to schedule a meeting to clarify these matters, he said. "There's no confusion on my part," I replied calmly. He tried to intimidate me, saying that any attempt to redirect the clients would be considered theft of proprietary business assets. But I was ready. I told him I wouldn't discuss it without my attorney present and gave him the contact information for MS. Diaz, the lawyer MS. Harper had introduced me to. The CEO called me later, but I let it go to voicemail. Instead, I focused on my new clients. Mateo, from a sustainable packaging company, came to my new office. He told me that Mr. Thompson had called him, trying to schedule an urgent meeting and claiming that there'd been a restructuring and he'd be taking over. Mateo said he'd told Mr. Thompson they were happy with the current arrangement. I felt a wave of validation. But then, I faced my first real challenge. Zara, from a boutique tech startup, called me on a Friday afternoon, sounding stressed. "Your former employer is telling our investors that our contract transfer was illegitimate. They're saying it could invalidate our entire financing round," she said. Their lead investor was spooked and talking about pulling out. Zara's startup had just secured crucial second-round funding, and losing it would be a disaster. I asked for the investor's contact information and said I'd have MS. Diaz reach out. Zara also told me that the company had offered to cut their service fees by 40% if they came back. This was a serious threat. If Zara went back, others might follow. I called MS. Diaz to explain the situation. She said they were playing hardball, but so could we. The next morning, I invited Zara to my office. When she arrived, Ms. Diaz was there, along with Mr. Carter, Ms. Harper's former mentor and the founder of her first investment group. Mr. Carter outlined a potential partnership that would not only resolve Zara's investor concerns, but also accelerate her company's growth. Over the next 2 weeks, similar situations played out with other vulnerable clients. I found ways to strengthen our relationships, showing a level of personal attention that my former company couldn't match. 3 weeks after my termination, I received an email from the CEO. We're prepared to offer you a partnership position with full executive privileges if you return the West Coast accounts to company management. This offer expires in 48 hours. I forwarded it to Ms. Diaz with a simple question. Time? Her reply was equally brief, almost. That evening, I spread all my documentation across my dining table. 5 months of careful preparation had led to this moment. Mr. Thompson called. He said the CEO's offer was genuine, full partnership, a corner office, and an executive compensation package. I asked what my role would be, and he hesitated. Strategic client management, he said, which meant I'd bring back the West Coast accounts but not actually manage them. I knew they were desperate. I sent a message to Ms. Diaz and she said it was perfect, exactly on schedule. The next morning, I went to Ms. Diaz's office with a briefcase full of documents. There, I met Ms. Foster from the Financial Crimes Unit. Ms. Foster asked if I had information about potential financial irregularities at my former company. I opened my briefcase and said, "Yes, I believe I do." The documents I presented were just a fraction of what Ms. Harper had compiled over 15 years. It was evidence of systematic financial manipulation, including creative revenue recognition, hidden expenses, and artificially inflated client contracts, all designed to boost executive bonuses while misleading shareholders. Ms. Harper had discovered these discrepancies 3 years ago. She tried to report them internally, but her department's budget was cut by 30%, and 3 of her staff were let go. She'd only shared all this with me when she knew she was dying. The client transfers were not just about me starting my own business. They were about protecting the clients from what was coming. Ms. Foster took the documents, saying it would take time to verify. I knew Ms. Harper had been methodical in her documentation. As she left, Ms. Diaz gave me an approving nod. "You've done exactly what Ms. Harper hoped you would," she said. My phone buzzed with a text from the CEO. Offer expires at 5 p.m. Today. Last chance. I didn't reply. Instead, I went in my office by the water for my client meetings. Then I got a call from Detective Wilson with the Financial Crimes Division. "We'd like to schedule a formal interview regarding the documentation you provided this morning," he said. "And you might want to turn on the financial news." I hung up and pulled up the news on my tablet. The headline read, "Breaking. Securities investigation launched against major consulting firm amid fraud allegations." The company's stock had already dropped 8% in pre-market trading. As the day went on, the news got worse for the company. The stock plunged 20%, trading was halted, and executives were being interviewed. By noon, the first executives were leaving the building with security escorts. By 4, Mr. Thompson and 3 others were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. That evening, Ms. Diaz called. "The SEC has requested formal interviews with 17 current and former employees. Your name is at the top of the list. They've also frozen all executive bonuses and compensation packages from the past 3 years." I thought about Ms. Harper's sister and her children, but Ms. Diaz said that Ms. Harper's final compensation package was being processed separately due to special circumstances. Ms. Harper's sister, Iris, called me later. She said that all of Ms. Harper's benefits were being released. She also told me that Ms. Harper had left a letter for me with her attorney to be delivered 1 month after everything happened. 2 days later, I sat in Iris's living room, holding an envelope with my name written in Ms. Harper's handwriting. The letter said that everything had gone according to plan. The company was facing investigation, the clients were safe with me, and her family's financial security was preserved. She explained that she'd chosen me because 3 years ago, when she first discovered the financial irregularities, I was the only one who noticed something was wrong, both with the company and with her. I'd offered help without knowing what was going on. She also left me a key to a storage unit. Inside was a filing cabinet with detailed dossiers on every executive at the company, their financial dealings, decision histories, and vulnerabilities. I immediately called MS Diaz and Detective Wilson. This was systematic corruption at every level. Within days, the investigation expanded. The board chairman resigned, and 3 more executives were placed on leave. The company's stock continued to fall. 6 months after my termination, I leased a larger office space in the same waterfront building. My team had grown to include 5 full-time employees, including Nell, who'd resigned from our former company after the investigation became public. On the day we moved into the new office, a package arrived. It was a framed photograph of MS Harper standing on the beach near her hometown, with a note from Iris saying she'd want it in my new office. I hung it in the reception area, and beneath it, I placed a plaque with the words, "Success isn't climbing their ladder, it's building your own." One afternoon, Quinn, who'd gotten a promotion I deserve at the old company, came to my office. He said he'd been offered a position at what was left of the company, but had turned it down. He felt it wasn't right to be rewarded for surviving the purge when he'd been part of the system. I considered him for a moment and offered him a junior position in my company. He was surprised, but I told him that MS Harper believed in second chances, and he'd warn me when he didn't have to. As I look around at my new office and my team, I feel MS Harper's presence. Her plan was not just about revenge. It was about justice and creating a better future. And I'm determined to keep building on what she started.